Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, December 15th, 2022. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district. Today, we are located on the Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Chair's announcements, lengthy lists, so settle in, please. So welcome to our December 15th board meeting. So first of all, Utility Department. I want to thank and acknowledge the TNRD Utility Services Department for recent actions going above and beyond in their service to TNRD communities. During the first cold snap of the year on November 10th, the eve of the long weekend, it was discovered that the Black Pines water reservoir was not refilling. Working well into the night in -20 temperatures, TNRD staff Darren Robinson, Keenan Carey, and Tyrone McCabe installed a backup intake pump and performed emergency repairs to the system, successfully avoiding a significant service disruption. The following week, as the cold snap continued, Mick Horton, Dale Stakowski, Rob Smith, Del Kennedy, and Al Nordic spent 3 days finding and repairing extensive leaks in the Vavenby water system. Then, on December 1st, during the second cold snap of the year, a major leak was detected in the Pritchard community water systems. Once again, working in -20 temperatures, TNRD staff Dale Stakowski and Al Nordic were outside all day, digging up and repairing damaged water lines. Working outside is part of the job for these guys, but standing in a wet trench most of the day in frigid temperatures shows the level of commitment of our staff. Please join me in thanking them for their continued hard work serving our residents. You'll notice today, this is the start of weighted versus unweighted voting. The votes are all labeled in your agenda. As I'm sure you all know, on a regular vote, if you do not put your hand up either way, you are noted down as having voted in the assent. You have voted for it if you don't put your hand up either way. For weighted voting, we ask you to please put your hand up in the air, whichever way you're voting, because the votes will have to be recorded. And as we all get used to this system, it's just going to take a little while to settle in. So none of this up, down, like you're doing an exercise of some kind. So chair's updates. Very, very pleased and proud to announce that Deborah Arnott, who for 30 years was with Community Future Sun Country, is one of 15 British Columbians to have recently been awarded the BC Medal of Good Citizenship. I'm sure Deb is familiar to many people in this room for her many, many years of hard work supporting rural communities and rural businesses. Very, very pleased that this Cache Creek resident has been honored and recognized by the province. Tomorrow marks the start of a bus service that will run twice a day every Friday between Lytton and Ashcroft. This has been one of the chief concerns of the Unmet Needs Committee. So it's hoped that this is going to be the start of some action for Lytton, and Ashcroft was chosen because a number of Lytton residents have relocated to Ashcroft for the time being. So it's a way for people to connect with friends and also to do some shopping and get to services that they might not otherwise be able to get hold of. So thank you to the Salvation Army, Yellowhead Community Services, and the Anglican Parish, the Unmet Needs Committee, and the people of Lytton who've worked hard to make this happen. CP Holiday Train is going to be in Kamloops, Savannah, and Ashcroft tomorrow, according to a source at CP. They are getting record turnouts. More than 10,000 people turned out in Edmonton last Friday for the Holiday Train. So great opportunity to see a fantastic event that has not been live in our community since 2019. You'll have noticed that the ukulele lending program has launched for the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library System. I was able to attend the launch yesterday. Fortunately, they did not ask me to play a ukulele. That would have killed the program before it started. But very pleased to again be partnering with River Song Guitars of Kamloops, who are truly a huge success story. The 30th annual Musical Merchandise Reviews Dealer's Choice Award was won by them for their best acoustic guitar of the year. So that's a local Kamloops business international success story. Was able to attend the Ashcroft Library reopening last week. 92-year-old Ashcroft resident Esther Darlington, and I can say her age because she is very quick to tell people how old she is, so I'm not giving away a secret. She has a lot of artwork displayed in the library, and she was able to speak at the grand reopening, and she also spoke at the opening of the Ashcroft Library in 1975. So that was a nice synergy there. And finally, one last thing, you'll have noticed, some of you, that the new Minister of Municipal Affairs, Anne Kang, has invited mayors and regional district chairs to a brief meeting with her tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for her to introduce herself. Now, of course, that conflicts with our committee of the whole meeting. We can't postpone it, unfortunately, because of the tight timeline and the staff luncheon and long service awards at 12. However, Vice Chair Smith has kindly agreed to absent herself at the beginning of tomorrow's meeting and go and extend greetings and apologies from the Thompson-Nicola Regional District and be there to hear what she has to say and give a brief report back. If anyone feels that they really do want to go and meet the minister, so to speak, then please feel free to go at 9 o'clock with Vice Chair Smith, just down the hallway there. So upcoming meetings and events. Tomorrow we have the committee of the whole meeting at 10. We have the board and all staff Christmas lunch and staff long service recognition awards. That will be here in this room and spilling down the hallway. I understand a huge number of pizzas have been ordered. At approximately 1 o'clock, there is going to be recognition of the long service staff members. We have one that is 30 years this year with the TNRD. I think combined, they have 275 years of working for the TNRD. On January 11th, we have a public hearing at Little Fort Community Hall. And then the 2023 schedule is going to be coming up on today's agenda. In your blue folders, you'll see correspondence from Bonaparte First Nation regarding the Maccabee Historic Fossil Site in the TNRD. That's a late addition to the agenda. The committee appointment expression of interest forms are in there as well. The statement of disclosure, Financial Disclosure Act forms, any mail that you may have that was directed to you. There are also some very late items that arrived regarding a letter request, a letter of support that's going to be later in the agenda. Those only came in today, so apologies for the lateness. They are in your blue folder if you have time to skim them. Director Stamer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You just mentioned that the committee of the whole meeting starts at 10. I believe it starts at 9.
At 9, sorry. Yes, at the same time as the minister's meeting tomorrow. So we have, do we have any additions to or deletions from the agenda? All right, we have 2 sets of minutes. We have the minutes of the inaugural meeting on November the 17th, and we have the recommendation. Director Stamer, thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? That is carried. We have the regular board meeting minutes of the November 24th meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Second, Director Houghton, any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor? That is carried. Delegations. We have a delegation from the Fraser Basin Council. Oh, Zoom. All right. So Molly Hunt, Assistant Program Management Manager for the Fraser Basin Council, and Ms. Hunt, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. I'm hopefully sharing my slides now. If you cannot see them, please can you give me a shout? That would be great. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Molly Hunt and I am Assistant Program Manager in the Flood team at Fraser Basin Council. And today I am speaking to you from our Vancouver office, which is on the unceded ancestral territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the floodplain mapping in BC project and to see whether you might be interested in being involved. Just to give an overview of what I'm going to be looking at today, we're going to look at some kind of background, some context of the project first, just to set the theme. And then we'll be looking at what the project is trying to achieve, the process we'll be going through, looking at some of our progress so far, and then also what our next steps and finally the project outputs will be. So to start with, some background on Fraser Basin Council, or FBC. We are a charitable non-profit organisation that brings people together to advance sustainability in the Fraser River Basin and also throughout BC. And we do this through our 3 strategic priorities on climate change, watersheds, and sustainable and resilient communities. And we're a collaboration of 4 orders of government and also private sector and civil society. We have a board of directors and the 8 regional districts within the Fraser River watershed, including the TNRD, each appoint a director to participate on our board. And I believe the TNRD's appointment will take place in January, so that's coming up soon. We have province-wide staff and also regional staff. So I'm part of the province-wide flood team, but we also have our regional staff, some of whom you may be already familiar with, and some of you will get to know them going forwards, I'm sure. And these are on the right from top to bottom: Terry Roberts, Alex DeChantal, and Erin Vieira. And in the agenda, I believe there's an info package which has some more detail on their roles and also contact details if you'd like to get in touch with any of them. And they work on a number of regional projects, a couple being the Shuswap Watershed Council and the Kamloops Air Quality Roundtable. And also just a note on kind of FBC and how we work. So we have educator roles and also impartial facilitator roles in the projects we're involved in. Importantly, also what we don't advocate for singular positions, so we don't kind of take particular sides on things, and we don't have any regulatory or legislative authority. We are a non-government organisation. And also some background on flood governance. So floodplain management, was introduced in BC in 1972 following some flooding, and this included setbacks and flood construction levels. So this helps determine where and how buildings should be built to limit the impacts of flooding. And from that kind of floodplain management, there were many floodplain maps developed in the 70s and 80s, and in lots of places, these are the maps that are still in use today. In 2003 and 4, the province passed down responsibility of floodplain designation and regulatory authority to local governments. And so the TNRD floodplain regulations are set out in Zoning Bylaw 2400. And this is based on that historical data. And also to note on that, the zoning bylaw requires compliance with provincial floodplain mapping where it is established. And floodplain mapping can also be useful in emergency response, of which local governments also have a role, such as in responding to flooding or declaring state of local emergency. This project has come from a national project, so the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Programme, which is a $63.8 million programme, otherwise known as FIMP, and this helps Canadians better prepare and plan for future floods. And the province of BC is working on the kind of BC part of the programme and also contributing financially, and they have a commitment to work in partnership with First Nations and local governments to better understand flood hazards and develop necessary tools to reduce flood risk. And us at Fraser Basin Council, we've been retained to administer and coordinate the technical work involved, but we'll be working closely with the province and federal government throughout. The objectives of the project are to develop high quality, standardized and consistent floodplain mapping for higher risk communities in BC, we'll be doing these mapping projects all over, so they need to kind of be standardized so they fit together. And they'll be useful for a wide range of purposes. We're not being prescriptive about this, but these are some ideas of how they could be used. So they could be used for informing land use planning policies and development decisions, such as updating flood construction levels, assessing potential impacts to people and other community values and assets, preparing or updating emergency response plans, as I mentioned before, and then any other flood mitigation, climate adaptation, or other uses as governments and communities wish. So far in the project, we started with the initial prioritization where we chose the areas we're going to be looking at, got consultants in place. We're currently working through scope refining with the consultants and through the community engagement meetings. And then all through next year, the consultants will be very busy doing the data collection, modeling and mapping. And then the project will wrap up in early 2024. And that's due to the federal funding program deadline. The initial prioritization, so how we chose the areas, that came from a federal Canada-wide flood risk assessment framework, which was adapted for BC. And that considered things like population exposure, annual losses, damage ratio, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And it also considered the availability of mapping and other information and input from provincial regional staff. And we also wanted to look where communities might have been less successful for applying for funding for floodplain mapping through other streams. And so from this, 5 regions have now been selected. But yeah, this is really just the start. There are many other regions in BC that would benefit from future funding. So the project areas are, so from down here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, possibly not. There we go. So we've got the lower Fraser-Coquihalla rivers down here, project A. Project B, the Nicola Coldwater that I'm talking to you about today. We're looking at the upper Fraser and the Chaco rivers up here, and the Bulkley and Skeena rivers in project D. And then project E, this is the Shuswap Lake region, and this is the newest project that we're just bringing on board now. And then on the right, we've got the project area for this particular project. So going from Douglas Lake down the Nicola River through Nicola Lake, all the way along to the Cooksbury Indian Band, and then looking at the Coldwater River up to the Coldwater Indian Band. And that covers the electoral areas M, N, and I. And yeah, just through those areas, we're just looking at the river corridors along those. This is something that I imagine you'll particularly have an interest in, because this is where we're talking about the level of participation required or that we'd like for being involved. One great thing is there's no funding required for being involved in the project. It's fully funded with provincial and federal funds. All we recommend is that staff participate to advise in a couple of meetings, but can be involved more if they wish. And those 2 meetings, the first one would be looking at any additional flood hazards that might be included, or looking at the specific formats for the maps. And then a second meeting to look at the draft maps before they're finalized. There's capacity funding available to support First Nations participation in the project. And also mapping is going to be completed only where First Nations governments and local governments are interested in being involved. Progress-wise, so far, we've sent out a few letters and had some follow-up calls to kind of get some initial interest. And then the consultants are now starting to arrange initial meetings. So the consultants had their first meeting yesterday. And these are very kind of extensive and complex floodplain mapping projects. And so we needed to make sure that we had the right people on the job. So we had a very robust procurement process, starting with shortlisting qualified consultants and then going through a request for proposal process. And BGC Engineering will be doing the work for the Nicola Coldwater region. Next step, so this is what the consultants are starting to work on now. So the engagement with communities, as I mentioned, where they'll be looking at flood hazards to include where possible, so tributaries and things like that. incorporating local Indigenous knowledge where possible, and also looking at the mapping output formats and how this project and the maps can work best for the communities we're creating the maps for. And they're also currently doing some data gathering, so collecting previous studies and also collecting new data out in the field, including bathymetry and LiDAR. And then they're going to get really stuck into the technical work. So then they'll be doing the analysis, the modeling, and then the mapping. So looking at the hydrology of rivers and tributaries, incorporating climate change, wildfire, and other kind of local considerations. They'll be creating or adapting a hydraulic model. And then from this, they'll have some modeled flood scenarios. So we're looking at the flood scenarios from the 20, 50, 100, 200 and 500 year return periods. And that will also include climate change scenarios. And then this all comes together, all this background work, to produce the floodplain map. And these will be high quality standardized maps to support the uses that I mentioned before. And after this, there will be that second round of engagement meetings to discuss the draft maps. And this is an example map here of a flood construction level map from Merit. So it'll be maps similar to this that will be produced. And then for each of the projects, by early 2024, when the project's wrapping up, each of the project areas will have the digital GIS files and the PDF maps. The hydraulic model will also be available, so we'll be making that available for third-party use following the end of this project. There'll be a report which summarizes all of that information, including any kind of key assumptions. And the aim is also to have a web portal accessible to the public, and so everyone can understand the risks of flooding. So in conclusion, what we're looking for today, we're looking to determine the interest levels in the project. So if the TNRD is interested in being involved, then the next step would be the consultants meeting with staff to have that initial meeting, as I mentioned, but also to clarify, while we're not currently looking for formal confirmation to participate in the project, we would need that a little bit later on. So before the maps are produced, before the end of 2023, we would need some formal participation. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. So this is my email. If there's any questions that you don't get a chance to ask today, please feel free to send them over. We also have Steve Litke, who is the Director of Water Programs at FBC, with us today, and Sarah Simon, who is the Senior Flood and Coastal Resilience Engineer from the province of BC. So we're on hand to answer any questions. So if there is time, Madam Chair, I will refer you back to lead questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hunt, for the presentation. Does anyone have any questions regarding the presentation? I will just mention that the slides are going to be provided to the corporate officer from this presentation, and they will be distributed to all the directors after today's meeting. Director Sarai?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Hunt, for that presentation. I'm just curious, when you talked about the mapping of the floodplains, will you also be looking at dams that are in our area and inspecting them? And would that inspection come back to us or the province? Because on one of your comments, you said the First Nations and municipalities will be responsible for reducing the flood risk. So will the dams fall into that category? And is that part of your scope?
Steve, I might, can I pass this to you on?
Yeah. Thanks, Molly, and thank you for the question. The operations of dams will certainly be part of the hydrological analysis to see how the storage and the operations and the release might contribute to flows. There hasn't been any discussion yet on whether a specific inspection would be required as part of this project, but we can follow up with the province to see if that would be necessary. I imagine that would fall under other dam safety provisions and probably outside of the scope of this project.
Are there any other questions? Director Houghton?
Just a follow up to Director Sarai. I know I think a lot of the problem being here over the years in the agricultural world, our water flows have changed dramatically. We used to have like the creek just south of town at Nutsford. Our creek used to run all summer. Now we get a big gush in the spring and poof, it's gone. And I know going back to some of the practices that we've done over the years, I'm not picking on logging, but our tree cap has changed. I think we got to take a long, hard look in this province to keep as much water in the back that we can. Getting back to Director Sarai's comments about dams. Since that dam fiasco in Oliver a few years ago, a lot of the dams have become under the ownership of the ranching community responsibility, and it's a touchy subject. But I think if we can keep as much of this water back, whether it be increasing the dams or what, to reduce our flash flows, I think that would help in a lot of the areas, whether it be in the Coquihalla or the Thompson Basin or the Little Wet Fraser Basin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Blackwell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On one of the slides, you were specifically talking about modeling in reference to past flood modeling, but you also had a comment on there about climate change modeling. Can you maybe explain a little bit about how you do that, considering just how dramatic some of the fluctuations, as Director Houghton was alluding to. Maybe can explain to us how that process may work a little bit for our own towns.
Yeah, apologies. This is over my technical expertise or outside of my technical expertise, but essentially what will be looked at is this is part of the hydrological analysis, which really focuses in on river flows and how climate change might influence that, as well as things like forest cover, wildfire, forestry harvesting, those kinds of things. And so it's a combination of looking at statistical analysis of the historic record, but also looking for trends and changes, and looking at also at climate projections in the future in terms of rates of precipitation, temperatures, and how that affects things like snow melt and the mix of snow and rain. So it's really looking at all of those different factors and how they contribute to the flows on these rivers, in the case of the Nicola Cold Water Project. And then those flows for the 20-year, 50-year, 100-year, et cetera, those are input into the hydraulic model to see how those flows translate into an extent of flooding and a depth of flooding throughout the study area. So I don't have the technical details in terms of how they go about that hydrological analysis, but hopefully that's helpful in understanding the scope of work and how they're approaching it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Fraser Basin Council? Again, thank you very much. I know you've been in touch with staff, and I know there's some discussion to be had there, and I'm sure that this will come back to the board at a future date for more formal consideration. So thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to bylaws. 7.1 electoral areas M and N fire protection service areas. This is an unweighted vote, and we do have a recommendation. Second, and we do have, that's a question or comment? Go ahead, sir.
I do realize, Madam Chair, that this is a change in the existing situation that we have, but being in the area where this will benefit my community, I don't feel comfortable voting on this at this point in time, so I'd like to recuse myself from this vote.
Thank you. I have Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we know how many properties are going to now be affected with this lack of fire protection coverage?
Mr. Vieira, are you able to speak to this?
Yes, through the chair, and yes, sorry, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's around 40 properties in that area from what I recall.
Director O'Reilly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just confirming there's going to be a record that Director Goetz recused himself and for the reason why. Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions on this item? I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Tell Director Getz he can return. Thank you. We move on to item 8.1, which is the CAO's verbal report. So I will turn this over to Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I just have a few updates for the board this afternoon. So firstly, the Board of Directors 2023 schedule of meetings you'll see coming up in the agenda here shortly. And then really just the key point there was the board and committee of the whole meetings will be, of course, included on their board statutory committees, strategic planning session, board conferences, and then any other events of importance. So that'll be on the agenda coming up that you'll all have a chance to vote on and discuss. Once the board approves this calendar, it'll be immediately added to our website, and Chelsea will be adding that to our Outlook calendars through email. So once approved, this calendar will be our official meetings. And if there is any changes that need to be made throughout the year, we're hoping that there's not, it would come back to the board for discussion and approval. Secondly, the Board of Directors committee appointments. So this usually happens in December as required. Board members are to provide individual expressions of interest for requests for specific committees that the board would have received in their blue folders, as well as an email from Ms. Campbell with expressions of interest for committee appointments. Deanna shared this list as well for external committees as well. And she's also included kind of the definitions and the terms of reference for each of those committees to help you along in choosing what you would like to be included in. This will allow you as the board, of course, to indicate your interest. And please be aware that some of these committees are predetermined for EA directors, where they are automatically on those with correct connection to some of our services. And if you do have any questions, Ms. Campbell will certainly be able to assist you. The board chair will reach out and have discussions and appoint committee members in early January with a report to follow on the upcoming meeting. Topic number 3 was just our Board of Directors strategic planning session. So this is booked right now for March 17th. It's with an external facilitator. It's Tracy Lawrenson. And there'll be a pre-survey to gather information as well. I know that there's a lot of municipalities and cities that are doing their strategic planning sessions, and this was just a date that made sense given all the feedback I've received. We do plan on using our 22 template that you all would have seen, and of course with the board's input and direction. This guides our work, our resources, and our budget going forward, and is really tied to our operational plans. And as you'll see on board reports, every board report actually refers back to the strategic plan and how it fits within the work we're doing. So this is why this session is so important for board interaction and the priorities of all members of the board. Number 4 is just a quick update on building inspection on a new process. So it's an online launch that's happening this month. Currently, we have a dedicated phone line for some of the services, and that is still going to be in place, but we're streamlining the process. So this new service will improve customer service in the building department by creating 2 online portals. One will be to book inspections directly without calling, and the other is to request. The other one is to request and pay for building information requests. And how this will impact the department is the 2,600 plus inspection requests that we performed in the last year could now be booked by calling or our designated inspection request line. This line will still be available. The benefits are also the online method will be a quick, intuitive, option to request an inspection versus leaving a voicemail message on the automated line. Requesters will receive a confirmation that a request has been submitted, as well as confirmation when the request has been processed. So significantly streamlines the administrative process. As for the building information request, this provides a summary of building permit history back to the 1970s. This is usually requested by real estate agents and other interested parties. We do hundreds of these each and every year for $75 each. And it'll sit and assist more. We assist municipalities as well that we do contract work for. It's a standard request when a property is being listed for sale, purchased, or mortgaged. In the past, these forms with BIR requests have been sent via email or by mail or even fax, and it'll be much more efficient going forward. And we hope to have this process up and running, if not in December and early January. We do about 600 of those building information requests in the past few years, so this will be certainly help us to be a lot more streamlined with that process going forward. And then finally, the Thompson Regional Hospital District meeting. Of course, we all just experienced that this morning for the first time. Certainly is a learning curve for sure. We do have a meeting coming up in January. Interior health, minor and major capital requests will be on that agenda. I did get information after the meeting today that we are going to be receiving, you've already received the less than $100,000 capital requests, but you're also at the next meeting going to receive the next under $100,000 capital for next year, as well as everything over 100,000 when it comes to capital and equipment as well. So you'll have all that information, and our budget will reflect that and be much more understandable, as Ms. Fox was walking us through that today. So increased engagement and dialogue with Interior Health. I've been working with them closely in the last few weeks to try to find a good path forward, and I think we're on our way. And hopefully we can continue to build our relationship with them and make this process easier in the future. So if there's any questions from the board, I'd be glad to take them.
Anyone have any questions for CAO Hildebrand? No. You got off easily today. There we go. So we move on to a recommendation arising out of that, which is regarding the board and committee meeting schedule, and Corporate Officer Campbell would like to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair Roden. So you all have draft copies of the board calendar and meeting schedule. And already there is a change that we need to make. Director Sal actually brought it to my attention that this year LGLA is actually having their elected official seminar in Richmond, where they usually have it for the Lower Mainland area, and then in Kelowna for the Southern Interior Local Government region. So the dates will actually be in March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, rather than the February dates. So we will get that changed before we send it out to you. And so just giving a bit of information about what goes into putting this calendar together, staff get together. We try and take it, or we do take into account our member municipalities' council schedules, because we obviously don't want to have any conflicts with their obligations to their councils. And then we take a look at statutory holidays as well as conventions and other conferences. But inevitably, you may end up having some other conflicts in your personal lives or on other committees, and so we can't take into account every conflict that may come up, but we've certainly done our best. And where you may have a conflict and are unable to attend, you can, of course, always send your alternate director in your absence. And if there's any questions about the schedule, I'm happy to take those questions.
Director Stamer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Where are we in the process of determining who goes to FCM?
Through the chair to Director Stamer, good question. We haven't done that draw yet. So for the board's awareness, those of you who are new to the board, we do a draw as to who goes to FCM. And when is FCM again? Beginning of May. So we'll bring, perhaps to the next agenda, we'll bring forward a report and do that draw.
Just for the new members of the board, what happens is we put the names into a hat and draw over the next 4 years. So approximately a quarter of the entire board of directors goes to each FCM. So it's an excellent chance, especially for the small communities, small municipalities, which cannot normally afford to send someone to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to send a representative or have a representative there. The TNRD very kindly ensures that everyone has at least one opportunity to go to an FCM. So they were shut down in 2020 and 2021. This year it was in Regina, next year is in Toronto, and I believe they alternate Toronto and somewhere else, Toronto, somewhere else. So If you really like Toronto, you've got a 50% chance of going there in the next 4 years. All right, so we do have a recommendation regarding the board and committee meeting schedule for 2023.
Second.
Any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We move on to item 8.1.3, the 2023 provisional budget. There has been a change to this recommendation, and I am going to hand it over to CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Unfortunately, or fortunately, you get to hear from me again prior to Ms. Fox. So I feel it's important for me to provide a bit of an overview regarding our 2023 provisional budget prior to the new CFO presenting a few of the highlights today. First and foremost, and to be really clear, this provisional budget is for information only, which is different than originally included in your agendas. Providing a provisional budget to the board has been a best practice, or a practice that we've done for many years, but is not required under the Local Government Act. We are delaying this year for a number of reasons, but mainly due to staffing. The new CFO has been in her role now for 2.5 weeks, and she needs just a bit more time for that transition. And then you mix COVID in there too. And we've been, this building has been struggling with that in the last few weeks, including Ms. Fox. I'm very confident going forward that Carla will do a great job leading the significant change. The more detailed draft plan will include current revenues and expenditures, of course, and tax implications. We'll start to be presented in January, February, and then we'll be finalizing that budget at the end of March. I think it's March 30th meeting. Our budget is certainly will be a challenge given the state of the economy. I think everyone's been talking about that in the last little while. And that's no different for our board as well. Our upcoming strategic plan will guide our investments and future directions on our financial plan. Some of the significant factors specifically for us and share with a lot of municipalities and governments is things such as inflation, union contracts and negotiations. We do have a negotiation that we are coming up on here at the end of this year. Purchasing of local goods and services are skyrocketing right now. Additional service requests. A great example of that is fire departments. There's been a lot of communities asking for assessments and viability studies on those, which again costs money and potentially new services. Assessment growth, new growth, and our dwindling surplus and reserves are all going to be kind of significant factors. There are a number of key services and priorities that will certainly influence the budget as well. Things such as emergency management requirements, the change in the upcoming Emergency Management Act could really change some of the things we do locally. Regional solid waste and recycling expectations, enhancements to our regional library operations, and including a potential Southwest Kamloops location. Building development, increased bylaw requirements, and also significant interest in, like I said, fire services and fire smart requests, which will all play a part in our budget. A key point that I would like to stress this year is the significant change in how we actually build our financial plan from past years, with the hopes to be more efficient and more streamlined and more of a team approach, staff team, I mean. It'll be more of an interactive, automated, and efficient process that'll set us up for future years. But unfortunately, this is the year that it'll be transitioned. So Carla's tasked with that. And I know she is certainly up for that challenge and very capable. To support Carla, we are utilizing the expertise of a recently retired CFO from the Caribou, which has been proven very, very valuable. And we're using Scott Reed for another month or so just to help us through this process. We've run extremely lean in the past few years with respect to staffing, and the board has recognized this and approved more appropriate resourcing to meet those demands. We have added these board-approved staff resources and continue to deliver services and projects as efficiently as possible, of course, while monitoring results. We continue to keep a close eye on our organizational structure and our staffing, of course, to ensure that we're continuing to execute at a high level. The board and public expectations of this organization is at an all-time high, and rightfully so. We've come through a lot in the last few years. We have made significant changes, and with that comes additional work and increased transparency. This requires the right organizational structure in our finance department and a team that continues to motivate and adapt to change, and I'm very confident in that. So with that being said, we will get to the finish line. We will deliver this budget and address the needs of the board, staff, and the public. But it won't be an easy process. We're planning a few board meetings, as I said, in the new year, with the finalization and adoption in March 30th of 2023. I know this will be new for many of the board members. This first budget is always a huge learning curve, but together we'll get there. So I'd like now to pass it over to Ms. Fox, just to provide some high-level updates and an overview of the upcoming budget.
Thank you, CFO Fox. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Roden. So I'm struggling a little bit just with getting a dry throat. So you'll have to bear with me if I have to stop to take a drink. And I have done a bit of a script for this one because the TNRD budget is much more of a handful and a mouthful to get across. I wanted to take the opportunity as well to talk about the process that we usually go through as new board members to understand what we go through as a staff and maybe a structure of some of the documents that you've been looking at. So on page 42, I think, of your agenda package is the provisional budget report and attachments. Now, you would typically expect that staff would bring a provisional budget with a 5-year plan and a draft budget. The difference in language for me is the provisional right now that we've looked at is the one of your previous 5-year plan. A draft budget is one that we've actually put further work into to address the changes. So I just want to have you be able to look at those documents. There are a few reasons that we've had the change. Obviously, CAO has been able to give you a lot of those reasons. We've really been focusing since I've come in on optimization in the finance department. And we've additionally had things like policy and bylaw updates. So that has actually had a significant impact on the finance department because it changes some of the roles and responsibilities of the people within finance, but also the managers and how they're interacting with finance. So there's a lot of extra training and time that takes to go into that. And then I shifted from doing that into the CFO role. So I've shifted gears a few times. We have a finance system. We don't have a budgeting system or a capital management system. So that means many of the processes that we have are very manual. This means a large investment in resources and time to make sure that we're bringing you an efficient and effective plan. It's manual, it's time consuming, and we're looking at optimizing that as well. But we've focused. There was a line item for a budget system within 2022, and we had to delay that because of the turnover and change, and a real focus on just being able to support the finance team to really do the day-to-day well and look at online payments and different things that support that team in handling the massive amount of work that comes at them. So our budget process typically starts in September with staff working to review and analyze the current state. We reflect on past actuals and prepare a new budget and estimate for what we anticipate is going to change or stay the same. So although staff had begun this process in September, the turnover in leadership did have an impact on that. And some of the illnesses and things we were faced with. Also with elections, it adds a bit more of a layer of complexity because we have to make sure there's enough time when we bring the budgets forward that we can take the time with you guys to make sure you understand what you're looking at and seeing. So today you might be looking or may have been looking to critically examine or analyze what we put in front of you. This would be challenging to do at this time just because we've provided you with a provisional based on previous years. It's not really a draft plan, although you can look, at the different services and just see that if they're consistently offering the same level of service and same funding requirements. So at this time, I'm going to skip through some of these things because I've told you them already. I just want to help you with an understanding of regional district budgeting. And one of the really important things, and I've come from municipal finance, is a regional district is quite different from a municipality. And we don't have one set of tax rates based on certain classes for the municipality. We have multiple. So we have 11 municipalities and 10 electoral areas. And that means for any of our given services, it might be specific to that municipality, or it might be a regional service that everyone pays into, or it's just a couple of the services. So there's a different budget and a different tax rate that's calculated for every one of those. So we have about 124 different services. That's a different budget for each service and almost a different tax rate for each service. So it gets quite overwhelming. And I think where it's unique is that when I sit at a municipal table, everybody has very similar interests of what they're trying to achieve. And when we're looking at a regional district budget, some of you are very interested in certain areas and some of you have nothing to do with certain areas. So it becomes a real art in how to bring a budget to you that you get enough information that you feel like you're able to make a decision, but you're making a decision when you do for much more than just your specific area. Approving a provisional budget is a good practice. However, previously approved plan does not show the stable operating budget. It takes into consideration some inflation and negotiated wage cost increases. The 2023 provisional budget is recommended or was recommended in order to rubber stamp just to continue on with day-to-day spending operations. And it allows the board to be able to understand that we, even though the year ends and we don't have a new budget, we still have to operate. Once a year end is complete, staff will have the ability to update the provisional with any estimated values, surplus carry forwards, and ensure more accurate financials are used in the budget calculation. So the large difference that you'd see if you look back in any of your 5-year plans is from the current budget to the following year, you see a bit of a drastic change in the amount of taxation that's required, and that's in regards to surpluses. A large part of that is. And that might be something new that you're used to seeing. What happens is for every service, we have to keep the financials separate. So with every surplus, if it generates a surplus or a deficit, legislatively, you have to carry that forward to the next year. So it doesn't matter if it's $5, it doesn't matter if it's $5 million. If you have a surplus, you're going to see that number show up as revenue in the next year, and it's going to decrease the amount of taxation you need. And because that happens, we do a similar process as we do with hospital district, just to a way lower extent, is trying to stabilize a tax rate for many different services. So it becomes a little bit of an art playing with that. I'm learning a lot about the surpluses right now. So I know there could be questions in that regard, and I will do my best to answer that. In your budget document, there are also through page 44, I think in the agenda package is the provisional just showing you 22 and 23. Or you can look at page 56, which is the entire 5-year plan. When you look at this document, what it does is the first few pages are summary pages, and that just rolls everything up into a summary document. The full plan is about 133 pages long. It becomes very overwhelming for me to try and go through every service. So again, when it comes back for us to discuss, it'll probably be at a higher level, and we'll be prepared to dive into a little bit more detail as you have questions in that regards. And you'll see separations like general government services, protective services. Under protective services, each of the different fire departments, transportation services, you're going to see street lighting and transit, environmental health services with solid waste, noxious weed, mosquito, and I won't go through them all. But essentially, that's what you're seeing through there as the summary. If you want to see the detail in those areas, you can jump back in pages, and it is broken down in detail, almost per line item, expenses and revenues, and you'll essentially see what electoral area taxation pays into it, what municipal taxation pays into it. But that could mean that there's only a few electoral areas that are paying into it and only a few municipalities, one or the other. So just to give you a little bit of a understanding of what you'd be looking at as you go through it, to prepare you for our more in-depth conversation in January. So I'm coming close to wrapping up. So I know that what we're doing today is not your normal. I know that what in the future, definitely having a conversation in December with more accurate numbers is what you will be expecting. We do still have challenges in that we do not have updated assessment values to even calculate tax rates with the new assessment changes, growth, different things like that. So when we bring you a budget in December, it is based on the previous year's assessment values. So that's just important to remember. We don't actually get an updated version until January, and the final one isn't given to us till March. So we're really given that final assessment value. We're calculating your taxes and the impact, and then trying to bring you that final budget for adoption before the March 31st deadline. So it's very tight. It's a lot of information. I know there's financial gurus that really want to learn and understand. It's very unique. In how we have to calculate the taxation. So I will do my very best to make it clear and summarize it in a way that you get all the information that you need. I also included in this, which I'm not sure that you've seen before, a capital plan. And it was just to give you an idea of 2022, we had some capital projects ongoing that were approved in the budget. For 2023, we can't redebate 2022 capital. It's already got funding allocated to it. Maybe if it hadn't started yet, it could come to the table and you could say, well, if we haven't started, we're not going to support it. But typically that isn't what happens. Doesn't mean it can't. And 2023 projects are presented more for approval. I don't believe in the past few years they've been brought to you separately. Typically, or a lot of times you'll see an operating budget with a capital budget presented separately. That is what I am working towards, because right now it's very hard. I give you a budget summary and you see an what we call an operating plan has capital in there. So you're not seeing a nice consistent number that's just gradually increasing based on inflation and a few increases. It's really hard to tell because it's swinging up and down based on $1 million projects that are in there. So hopefully by the time I bring it to you in January, what I've already worked on is creating an operating plan, sifting out the capital so that you can see the two numbers separately. At least if it's not in the overall budget, what we'll look at and talk to, you can see those two numbers separately. And it's helped me greatly to do that, because then I can really see the consistent operating amount that's being paying for the different services. And when I talk about level of service, really what I'm saying is we've set up a service. Every service has a separate bylaw that guides how that service is set up and what it can charge for taxation and what it can collect. And equally, if you have a capital reserve for that service, there's another bylaw and it dictates what you can spend. So we have hundreds of bylaws that guide the service, and then you need a reserve for capital, not for operating reserves. However, it's just important to know that, because it's not like a municipality where you can create a reserve and just spend. There's much more work that goes into creating a reserve. And one of the reasons that surpluses are used a lot, sometimes instead of creating a reserve, because it's much more onerous. But we'll educate ourselves on that. I'm learning why we're doing things, and then hopefully I can bring forward practices that better support those types of things. So I'm not gonna repeat what CAO Hildebrandt said, just in regards to the increases that you can expect. There are pages within here, I think 46 to 49 in your agenda package, that talk about what you can expect going forward. There are things that the board has already supported that are moving forward. Some IT cost increases for security and improved operation systems that work better for us now since COVID and communication and so many online tools are required. There is some of the position change requirements, like the deputy CFO position that I've currently vacated. That was previously increased. It wasn't included on 2022 budget, so you're going to see it on 2023. So there are some increases that are going to jump into that administrative one that were previously approved decisions from the board. And I'll try to identify that so you can clearly see those things when it comes forward. So I'm certainly don't want to get to the glazed part or where I've put somebody to sleep. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully if you have any questions in regards to what we've put before you today, I can attempt to answer them, and I may have to lean on some of my teammates if it's specific to services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CFO Fox. There is no vote required on this. It's for information only. If anyone has any questions for CFO Fox, please raise your hand and start things off. We have Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much, Carla, for the presentation. I'm looking forward to the meeting on the 18th because that's the one we're talking about, right? The council, the whole meeting for budget specifically. Is there a way to break this out? Because everyone in this room is different, because it affects us differently, and thanks to you and your staff, because it's got to be a daunting task, like you mentioned, all the components, even in a particular electoral area, and how it relates to the change in the budget, and how then you end up the assessment rate and the mill rates and all that kind of stuff. Is there a way to break this out again on a program where we can look at it and say, okay, this is an electoral B concern that has really nothing to do with us regionally as a taxation perspective, because they're basically covering the whole cost, you know, in those improvements or whatever's going on, or no, this is a capital expense that we're all going to share. Is there a way that we can do that without having, like right now you've got fire protection and it's all the areas, and then you've got community halls and it's all in one area? Is there a way to break it out so that anybody can say, well, okay, what's in it for me? I'm an electoral B. Sorry, not to to get Director Husoff all stirred up, but using it as an example is just being able to sort of cut to the chase and say, okay, this is what we're looking at. Is, you know, we spent this last year, we're spending this year. I'm aware of all that's going on. This is going to be my impact. It looks like we're going to increase spending by 10%. So what's the impact on taxes? Is there a way of doing that?
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. So what you're talking about is exactly what I'm trying to achieve right now. I think you're going to have to bear with me, because right now, what I'm trying to do is create a system that's not manual with thousands of hand keyed numbers to more of a digital process. That's my first priority, so that I can just actually put it into the program that calculates the taxation. There is a spreadsheet that breaks this down in the way that you're talking about, but I don't know if it's in a format that would be easily used for a presentation style. But as I go through it, and as I'm learning myself that piece of it, because that's my next stage, I will certainly keep that in mind and try and do my best to bring something forward that you can see, if not every service separate, the ones that affect your area presented in that way. I will do my best. I can't promise it, but I certainly am trying to achieve that right now. And just to keep in mind, from now till January 18th, pretty much a week, 2 weeks before January 18th is when I actually have to have this document ready to be vetted through everybody. So I have a very short window. I'm giving you some excuses so I can have a bit of an out, but I will do my best.
Thank you for that.
Director Blackwell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think Director Samer's comments lead into what I was going to ask you specifically about. You mentioned budget system. What are we using? Are we using old Excel spreadsheets? Are we using modern municipal budgeting software? Because we're going, I'm only saying this because we're going through exactly this process right now for the District of Clearwater. And having seen the previews of what's accomplishable with that new software, if we haven't already voted to buy that, I'll vote for it right now. Thank you. And maybe just explain just how archaic we currently are in terms of, yes.
Thank you, Chair, through the board. I've worked in a number of different municipalities. We are not unique in the fact that we use Excel. Budget programs for regional districts are really complicated. And there is not a really great system that handles both your day-to-day financials and your budget and the way that we have to calculate taxation. So I think most regional districts do have the ability to use a budget system, but they still end up manually trying to do the tax calculation in the end. So I'm going to say that I think there's still a bit of a manual part. Where we are at right now is completely all in Excel with Excel worksheets. And I could talk about Excel forever and I could lose the time in Excel, but we have literally 3 different workbooks that link together that have massive tabs that calculate the taxation. So I almost envision like your old computer setup with these big boxes, and you go in the room and those are your computers. It's a little bit what it feels like. I'm not overly surprised, but how manual it is and that we don't have consistent templates for everybody to follow. I've already created that. And I have a bit of a system that's linked and creating sheets to populate those tax calculation sheets. So I've come a long way in a short period of time to get there. The only problem is anytime, if you're familiar with working in Excel, it's like having 3 million little calculators in one little cell. And if somebody goes in there and keys something in wrong, it could throw out your whole spreadsheet. So us accountants get really good at building in fail safes and little colored cells. We call them check variances to make sure when we're keying things in there and documents are linked together, that one document over here balances to this document. So we do have those built in. And at the end of the day, you have to balance. So it is working, and it is extremely detailed, very good notes within cells. But there's 3 million cells and I got to read all those notes. So it's a lot to try and get through in a short period of time. And that's why we've looked to Mr. Reed to help us, because he's actually familiar with the system that we use. So I've got the data updated and he's going to help me with that tax calculation portion.
Thank you for that terrifying answer.
Chair Roden, may I just add something to that, just to be a little bit more direct, because I know Carla's being nice here. We are very manual, very antiquated, and things need to change, and we've made significant changes already, and Carla's leading that change because we need to get to that next level. So it's coming.
Director Hamer Jackson.
I don't have a question, but I'd really appreciate your answers. They're very good.
Thank you, CFO Fox.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I just wanted to, I went through that whole description and I didn't say, there is a budget program out there called Questica. Now there are other ones, but we have heard very good things. We are looking into it because we've had so many shifts and changes. It's just been put on hold. So I am carrying that line item forward because that's a must have, but we had to get our day-to-day running efficiently before I could say that, even though it's really needed. It is, you're going to see it as a line item.
Thank you very much. You make it sound like you're one step above using abacus down there, maybe. Director Stamer, supplemental.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair Roden. Ms. Fox, when you were talking earlier about the SERP, can you explain probably to some of the people in here, when you said that there's a surplus that hasn't been expended and it ends up being as a revenue line item, can you explain the difference between having that show up on a revenue item and putting it into a surplus account for a fund for a specific purpose?
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. So the surpluses get really complicated. So every year, every service has a surplus or a deficit. 95, 98% of the time it's surplus, because obviously you try not to run a deficit ever. Legislatively, that surplus or deficit has to be collected the next year. So if you think about a zero-based budget, we have revenues and expenditures. All the expenditures have to be paid for. This is our zero-based budget. So we do that through grant revenue, reserve transfers, and taxation. So once that's balanced out, we come to zero, $1 million of revenue, $1 million of expenditures. But in that year, you only spend 800,000. Now we have a $200,000 surplus. I have to, because I taxed and I got revenue sitting there for that, I have to do something with that. So we are mandated to take that and put it to the next year, thus reducing the amount of taxation you need in that next year. So all the revenues, if your operating budget still stays $1 million, you don't need $1 million from taxation because you have a $200,000 surplus. You only need 800,000 from taxation. But what happens is because there's always surpluses and we're trying to keep that tax rate static, we end up balancing a surplus. So we end up predicting a surplus almost every year because you're trying to keep that tax rate static. So it ends up where you should be worried is if you see a surplus going $1 million, 0, 2 million, right? Because then that's going to have a negative effect. If your surplus is kind of staying consistent, that means your tax rate's probably staying consistent and so are your operating expenditures. But trying to explain to people why you're running with surpluses when we're taking people's tax money, that's where it gets more complicated for you guys to work through your constituents. So I didn't directly answer the question about reserves because you have to kind of understand that. If you typically, your surplus moves to an account, essentially. It's cash, it's got to move somewhere. If you wanted to the next year, rather than just have that cash sit as a surplus, you could choose to put it into a reserve. And I think about planning and development, and we've done just that. So we've got a surplus. We want to start bringing that surplus down because it's consistent. We're actually putting some of that into the reserve. So the next year, you had $1 million worth of expenditures. Now we're going to put $400,000 into the reserve. So you got $1.4 million of expenses. And that surplus is going to not be as much. So the next year that's going to go down. But overall, that's basically how money gets into a reserve. If it's going into a capital reserve, and we have a surplus in every department or every area, if you wanted to do that in every area, you have 124 bylaws that you're creating. So what I believe is that capital surpluses get more frequently used because it's very cumbersome to create capital reserve bylaws every year. So it's a little bit of that, but we have a number of capital and operating reserves as well. So there is a way to get your surplus into reserve by making an intentional decision in the following year, and you can keep that transfer going, thus reducing your surplus every year. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted, because I'm sure there's some members here that don't really know the difference between the two. So thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Blackwell and then Director Middleton.
Very simple question, just for it, because I can't think of it off the top of my head, the answer. Municipalities are required to run a balanced budget. Are RDs required as well to run a balanced budget?
Thank you, Chair Roden. Through to the board, yes. The budget that we present has to come to zero. So our revenues minus our expenses must equal zero. They never do, and they don't for a municipality either. It's just a municipality has 2 income statements and we have 124.
Director Middleton.
Chair through. If that surplus is created from a certain electoral area, does that carry through flow back to that electoral area so that basically electoral area A, who were very prudent and didn't blow through their budget and had a surplus, doesn't turn around and offset, general tax increases or decreases in all areas?
Thank you, Chair, through to the board. Absolutely. So unlike a municipality, we have a fund, essentially a fund for each service, and we cannot mix them. Now, boards can intentionally make policies and make decisions at this level to move funds or loan one to the other, but typically I'm not seeing that. And any surplus, we are mandated to return that surplus to the actual service that created it.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I'll move the provisional budget.
No, we're not moving. This is for information, just to talk about it. Oh, we're gonna get a chance to do that. Don't worry.
January.
Don't worry. Thank you very much, CFO Fox. We move on to item 8.1.4 floodplain exemption application number FP11. And I would like to turn this over to the General Manager of Development Services to speak to this.
Good afternoon. So the report was complicated and a lot of work, and this application has been with us before the atmospheric river happened in November. So it's been through several iterations. I do have a slide PowerPoint if you'd like me to provide some highlights. They do repeat what's in the report. We expected that there would be some questions. If your questions are of a technical nature, the agent, Mr. Alan Bates, a professional engineer from, Steamworks Consulting? I believe he's on Zoom to answer your questions. If your questions are regarding process through a zoning bylaw, through how we would handle this, through the staff recommendation, I'm happy to answer those. So through the chair, would you like a short review of what this application is for and the history a little bit, or just open it up to motions on the floor?
I think we'll open it up to motions on the floor. If anyone has questions, we certainly have the people who are qualified to answer them. So we do have a recommendation for staff, from staff. Thank you. All right, open it up to discussion. Director Stamer, now there's a surprise. I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Thank you for embarrassing me, Chair Roden. Yeah, not very easy. No, thanks for that.
So
To
Director
Miss
Stamer.
to Ms. Savokova, how does this impact the property owner if they still get flooded out in the future? Are they still eligible for provincial grants?
So no, it would not. First off, how does this impact the owner? If the board was not to grant this flood exemption, with or without the three provisos, would essentially render the land being unable to be developed for any kind of permanent building. They could visit it and enjoy it, but they couldn't develop on it. The way the recommendation is worded, they would very clearly, because we always think, not just for this owner, but for any future owner of the land. And we trust that they would make themselves aware, so buyer beware. And that's why we put things, register notices on title, covenants, easements, what have you. They would be aware that if there is any kind of damage, like for example, if they had built previously, they would have had losses in November of, well, last year. With the covenant on title, they would be aware that there is no, I believe the word is, they would not be eligible for any kind of compensation from any level of government. So it would be the TNRD, or I mean, it's usually the province, not us. And there is a current floodplain covenant on the property title that was born of the time when it was subdivided. But that is, we are named, as well as the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. That agreement, that covenant doesn't really make sense because of the way that Spice Creek has moved.
Are there any other questions on this? If not, then we will proceed to the vote. We do have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. We move on to 8.1.5 contract award for professional consulting services for the Utility Services Department. Just to note, this will be a weighted vote. So we do have a recommendation.
Second.
Director Laird, Director Smith, discussion. Questions? Well, we've got Director Laird. We have the General Manager of Operations here who is available to answer questions if anyone has any. So Director Laird, I have you first. Question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only question I had is it's a $4.5 million contract. Those expenses would only be incurred on whatever works is going on within the different utilities that you contracted for. So, and there's items that are listed that haven't been started or in the process of being done. So the only time that would kick in is when we're dealing with a specific project that the TNRD is doing.
Yeah, through the chair, Director Laird, that is correct. So maybe I'll give a little bit more explanation, and I'm aware that's it's a big number there. The project is specifically funded by each utility that would be coming up, and the majority of those projects would only happen if/when hopefully there's grant funding for those projects. So the purpose of this contract award is to simplify having to go to public tender process multiple times per year every time a new project comes up, and to build that and have a sort of a relationship with a go-to consultant who knows our systems.
Okay, so one other. So that would basically be, if it's a water utility, it'd be that for that specific water district. And it would, what my fear is it might become a budget line item in the TNRD budget on a yearly basis, so that the whole board is paying. I just wanted to make sure this item generated for each different capital works.
Yeah, through the chair, it would only be funded by the individual utility services. So none of this recommendation would impact overall TNRD general budget.
That's great. Thank you.
Director Rain?
Just in the same nature, if we don't get grants and the work's not there, how are we paying? Are we committed to the full 900,000 each year? Or if bad luck, we don't get any grants anywhere and there's a couple of $100,000 worth of work, are we paying then just 200,000? Where are the checks and balances? Obviously, if it's 900,000 a year and we get a whole bunch of grants and their costs are $1.1 million, well, that's just part of the 5-year deal for them. We're kind of capped at the upset of 900 grand a year.
Thanks, through the chair, there's zero minimum obligation for us in this contract. So the contract, we would only engage their services when and if we have funding. So there's a real possibility we could spend zero in a given year if we don't have any grant funding.
Any further comments, questions? No, seeing none. Now this is a weighted vote, so we just ask to everyone keep your, Olivia, are you the one who's going to be keeping score using Excel? I don't know. What are you using for this? So just if everyone could just keep their hands in the air, unless well, yeah, exactly. So just give Olivia a chance to just record. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? No math needed. We have no one opposed. That was easy. It's just that easy. All right, we move on to 8.1.6 contract award for electoral area B, solid waste services. We do have a recommendation. Director Anta, thank you. Director
Second.
Thorpe, second. Any discussion on this? No, good deal. All right. Director Houghton?
I just noticed that it's going to a local firm in Blue River, and I think that's a very good choice on TNRD's part to have a local contractor service a local community. And on that, are there other contracts coming up in the near future for all the other transfer stations, eco depots? Will that be coming down the road?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, that's actually up for tender in the new year.
Good choice.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, then another weighted vote on the question. All those in favor? I see no one opposed, so that is carried. Thank you very much. 8.1.7 Recycle BC Draft Stewardship Plan, a letter to be sent to Minister George Heyman. And I believe the General Manager of Operations wishes to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thought I'd just spend just a couple minutes giving some background of how these stewardship program works in British Columbia for the benefit of the new folks on the board. So Recycle BC is one of many what's called stewardship organizations within the province of BC. The way the provinces are regulating and steering waste management is away from, their goal is to bring those costs and operations away from local government responsibility and put it onto the producers of the product. They call that extended producer responsibility. So this started back in the 90s with the creation of the recycling regulation. And the first products on there, which you would know well, are things like beverage containers and tires and batteries that have been around for a long time. That when you as a consumer purchase those products, you pay an upfront disposal fee. When you buy a brand new tire, you already pay the disposal fee. And then those fees will go to the organization that's responsible for then recovering and recycling those at the end of the life. So that's the model. And so for the last 20 years, the province has been adding other products to the recycling regulation. The most recent and the biggest one was packaging and printed paper, which created the organization called Recycle BC. So I want to clarify the way it works is Recycle BC and these other agencies are not government agencies, but they exist because the government has mandated that the producers of the product set up a program to recover it. So the producers of all packaging and printed paper created this organization called Recycle BC. They collect minute fractions of a penny on everything being sold. You don't see it on a receipt, but it goes to fund Recycle BC. And then Recycle BC is responsible for collecting that material. Now, where in operations, when the rubber hits the road, that's especially when it comes to this, to all packaging and printed material, that's easier said than done. So they create a plan that must be approved by the province, which they did initially back in 2014 when they first established. That plan has to be reviewed and updated and approved by the minister every 5 years. That plan is up for approval. The reason we're bringing this recommendation forward is that that plan in following our review of it reduces the level of service to basically all small and rural communities in BC. And we want to get the board support in encouraging the minister not to support that. So what operationally, what would end up happening in this situation, there's examples in the report there, is that we would receive less funding from Recycle BC to continue to capture their material, the packaging and printed paper that we manage on their behalf at our depots, we would have to pay more tax dollars to continue to provide that service. Because Recycle BC is essentially changing the criteria of receiving that funding and working within their program. So, and I wanted to clarify, because I had some questions prior to the meeting, that we're not suggesting that we the TNRD operations would actually change our service if this was passed, but what it would mean is that the costs would increase to maintain the same level of service. I'll leave it at that. Open it up for questions.
Are there any questions, comments? Director Houghton?
Jamie, can you explain in your report there, it showed that certain places met criteria and some didn't. The ones that didn't, like Pritchard and Sun Peaks and Director Rain's area. What is the reasoning that some met and some didn't meet?
Thanks. Through the chair, so we did a detailed review of the draft stewardship plan, and in consultation with staff at Recycle BC, they confirmed that these don't meet their criteria for different reasons. But for example, both Sun Peaks and South Thompson at Pritchard, the issue was that they'll only authorize one facility within 40 kilometers from each other. So the Sun Peaks transfer station is 30 kilometers from our Heffley Creek Eco Depot. And according to their new draft plan, they would only fund one facility within a 40-kilometer catchment. So that's an example of why they're sort of our frustration and issue with their draft plan.
Director Rain, and then I have Director Sarai.
My question was just answered. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Guerra, how do we monitor? We do the way you said it, we pick up and do their work and they get paid to recycle the items that we pick up on their behalf. What is our obligation? Do we check if they're doing it properly? Is that a province? And is there a penalty involved? Do we get money back if they're not doing it? Like, how does that work? Because I've been hearing just locally here that there's been a lot of recycling material that is all over Valley View area, and that's just in the municipality of Kamloops, that it's in the neighboring business areas and so how does that get monitored, and how do we monitor our recycling provider?
Thank you. Through the chair, I can answer that question a few ways. The relationship mostly goes the other way around. We, the regional district, and City of Kamloops, the same example, we are in a contract with Recycle BC. So we are contracted by them and paid by them to collect their material. So we're accountable and we sign a very thorough agreement with them of all the services that we're providing to them. And then they, as an entity, Recycle BC, are accountable to the minister who holds that approved plan, which is what's now up for sort of the review. So in terms of, I don't know if the question was around what they do with the recycling after we hand it over to them. Yeah, so the answer to that is they're accountable to the province, and the province reviews that. They have to report to the province on an annual basis, and those are public reports as well that go out.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Ferreira, just a quick one, Jamie, how are we doing with the cardboard in the waste? Are we, because remember we had to make those changes, right, in our eco depots with the amount of cardboard that's going in there. How's that going?
Yeah, through the chair, the disposal ban is what you're referring to. Yeah, so we've started enforcement on the disposal ban just the last few months. And so far there's actually we're finding really good compliance. We're issuing some warning tickets, but it's being generally well received, and it was, as the board was aware, kind of the next step to encourage further recycling.
We move on to item 8.1.8 TNRD building permit activity highlights. This is for information only. Does anyone have any questions? No, then we move on to committees. We have in committee of the whole 9.1.1. There is a recommendation, but I believe the general manager of development services would very much like to speak to this.
So, good afternoon. This item went to the previous board on October 7th. It went from committee of the whole, which typically when it's certain kinds of recommendations, they have to go back through the board, for example, to support a project or a bylaw, what have you. So this has come back to the new board. That was quite a involved presentation. I did provide a recommendation. The board, the committee of the whole did not proceed with my recommendation, which is, I have to get over that. But I didn't see it coming. And so I didn't really address in the report the process that would be necessary to just commence changes to a zoning bylaw, commence a public process for changes to a zoning bylaw to reduce parcel areas. So we already have, of all regional districts that I could find, the smallest parcel area in our zoning bylaw, which informs subdivision. All our long-range planning recommends the other way, which was my recommendation. So my caution, because the province establishes a kind of hierarchy of planning, zoning is when the rubber hits the road, it's the regulation. If you change a zoning bylaw, you can change it, but it has to be consistent with your long-range planning. So if the board was to take my recommendation and increase some of our parcel areas and make them larger, they could do that because it's consistent with our regional growth strategy. There's several OCPs involved. I think we have 8 or 9 OCPs in total across the whole region. So it's kind of complicated. So what I recommend to you at this point is that if this board wants to proceed with this, and the parcel areas we have in our zoning bylaw now have not changed since the early 1970s. So I would submit to you, this is not urgent. Put it on pause for the time being. We have just completed our monitoring report for the regional growth strategy, which I hope to explain and walk you through tomorrow morning at the committee of the whole. Then really the correct process to effect a public process to look at parcel areas would not be directly through zoning, because then you're just going to have to go back through that public process for the official community plans. There are 3 OCP. OCP stands for official community plans, and I promise not to use too many acronyms, but the real process has to be at that higher level. If the board wants to go down that path, look at those, revise those, make sure they're consistent with the regional growth strategy, which is our highest level statutory plan. And statutory just means it's a fancy word to say it's governed under legislation, provincial legislation. So it starts at the top, and our regional growth strategy, it's a contract between all of you. So between all the municipalities and all the surrounding rural electoral areas around them to govern planning. So my recommendation to you, if the board wishes to either hold in abeyance or postpone, what can I do?
So I'll just speak to this just from a procedural aspect. And so there is a recommendation that's on the agenda, which we had to put forward because that was what the committee of the whole recommended. But as you heard from Ms. Sadilkova, her recommendation is that the board leave that recommendation alone for now and instead pass a resolution that the board postpone considering that recommendation until such time as a decision has been made on amending the regional growth strategy and the 3 impacted official community plans.
Would you by any chance have a recommendation to that effect already written that
Yes.
could be moved by
I do.
someone?
I do.
Fantastic.
I'll move it and speak to it, please.
Pardon me?
I'll move it and then speak to it.
Seconded.
All
Thank
right,
you.
we have it, we have not the recommendation in your agenda, but the recommendation as just suggested by Corporate Officer Campbell. All moved and seconded, and Director O'Reilly would like to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing that I think we should make sure we discuss, as much as this regional growth strategy is important, we don't have a strategic plan for this board. We don't know what this entire board wants. So having that in place as well will help us have that guiding document as to what we want to see and may have impact on this if we want to move it forward or not. So I think it's integral that that is done before this does come forward. That being said, I do think it's very worthy of a discussion in the future, but we got to make sure that we get these pieces in place first. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Director O'Reilly. Does anyone else wish to speak to this? Have any questions? So the recommendation that is on the floor is that we postpone the discussion of this, et cetera, et cetera. If yes, if you could, please, I can't remember it all. I'm afraid.
So the recommendation is that the board postpone approval of the recommendation to look at broadly reducing required parcel area until a decision on amending the regional growth strategy and the 3 impacted official community plans can be considered.
That's what I was going to say, but thank you very much. All right, on the question then, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. 9.1.2 Wells Gray Services Committee, we do have a recommendation. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any comments? Anyone wish to speak to this? Seeing no hands flailing in the air, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Did I turn that off? We have the draft minutes from the Fraser Basin Council meeting of November 8th. No motion is necessary, but does anyone have any questions or comments on that? All right, we move on to information correspondence. We have a letter from the BC SPCA to the Board of Directors. Any comments on this? New business, we move on to 11.1. Director Grenier has a request for a letter to be sent to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure regarding Tranquil Chris Creek Road. So we do have a recommendation, but I believe Corporate Officer Campbell would just have a few words on this.
Thank you, Chair Roden. The board will see that a number of letters, last minute letters were added to your blue folders regarding this matter. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity to just give the board a bit of information on what the process is for correspondence for the future. And so that if you get any questions from your constituents, you can advise them of the process and where to find information about the process. So there is a board correspondence policy, and a link to that policy was provided in your orientation manuals that you were given. So I strongly recommend that you make sure that you're familiar with that. But essentially all correspondence addressed to the board does get placed on the agenda, but it does need to be addressed to the Board of Directors. So it can't be to whom it may concern or to the TNRD. We will follow up with letter writers to clarify whether or not they want their letter to be sent to the Board of Directors. But on our website, on our Board of Directors page, there is instructions and information about how residents can reach out individually to their elected officials, as well as the Board of Directors in general. And so when we receive a letter, as long as it's received the Wednesday before the actual board meeting, it'll make it on the agenda. And that's how all correspondence that is addressed to the board is shared with you. If we get a letter that's addressed to the board and it's of an urgent nature and it misses that deadline, then we will circulate it to you. So just some information to share with you and just to pass on.
So we do have a recommendation that the board send a letter to the Honorable Rob Fleming. Would someone care to move that recommendation? Director Grenier, second by Director Houghton. Thank you. Any discussion, comments, questions? Director Grenier?
I just simply, I think the letter is self-explanatory, but this was the number one issue for the people that live in the Tranquil, Alpine Valley, Red Lake area. There is a map that you'll see up on the board. And essentially, if you could just scroll up to the Kamloops Lake area on that map, if that's possible. This road cuts diagonally from Kamloops up through the north part, north of Kamloops Lake. You can see Alpine Valley, you can see Red Lake on this map. It is that road, and that road runs about 60 kilometers up to, I think it's the Stewart Ranch area.
Stewart from Red Lake back up.
This is the primary road for all the people that live in those communities. It is a terrible road. I was invited to drive that road instead of the road that goes up through the Dead Man Valley. And I've lived here for 27 years, and it's worse than the logging roads that I've driven. And these people don't seem to be able to get anybody's attention. So in a nice way, I just thought we would bring this attention as a board to the province, not just as an individual area director letter, hoping that the minister might take a look at this and see what's the right thing to do about this road.
Okay, thank you very much for that background. Director Houghton?
Would it be in our interest, since there's a local road maintenance contractor that's employed to look after that road, to CC them on the letter? And this might be more of the funding that the ministry has given the particular road maintenance contractor to service that road. It might not just be the contractor's fault. It might be the funding formula.
Thank you for that. And yes, the road maintenance company can be CC'd on the correspondence. Argo? Any further comments or questions? On the motion then, all those, Director Middleton?
Has Argo been approached about the problems, and do they respond back saying, we don't have enough money in our contract to look after this properly? Is there like been any feedback from Argo Roads to date already on this issue?
I have been advised by the residents, and you'll see on their website that they constantly communicate with Argo Road Maintenance, and that Argo Road Maintenance is limited by their staff, their equipment. I can tell you that the snowplow truck got stuck and was put off to the side of the road for 3 hours. They didn't even get to snowplow the whole road. They just snowplowed half the road. It hasn't been snowplowed. And so I don't know where the problem is. I think the ministry needs to figure out whether it's funding Argo Road Maintenance, whether it's the road that has to be rebuilt, whether sections have to be capped. I traveled that road 2 days after it had been graded, and it's just horrible. 2 days after it's been graded. And I don't know, I can't speak to why it's that way. It's just not a tenable situation for those people. Some of them are nurses driving back and forth. The kids have to go back to school every day. People's trucks are being destroyed by driving on their road. And that's why it's their number one issue.
Is this road serviced by a school bus?
I understand, because the road, the school was closed up there, that these people are now bused into Kamloops.
So an avenue of added horsepower behind a complaint regarding the road could be further sort of amplified, shall we say, if the school board was to add concern in that now a service provider can't service properly, other than just noisy residents, because there's lots of noisy residents about an awful lot of different items. Is there a way to add the school board into this conversation or into this letter?
I think that's an excellent idea. I think the weight of this TNRD board was my objective in drafting this letter, copying Argo Road Maintenance, copying the school board. I think those are all appropriate things to do. I really think the minister needs an opportunity to be aware of this problem and then say what he's going to say about it. And I think our local MLAs if this is tabled, we'll have an opportunity to also consult with the minister.
Thank you, Director Sa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Grenier, sorry, I don't mean to bog down your process here, but the issues that you described, it also fits, my constituents on Dunn Lake Road in East Blackpool as well. I've actually met with the regional manager for MOTI about the same issues. Trucks are actually, residents, their trucks are being destroyed, just traveling at Dunn Lake Road, vehicles going off the road in the winter. The response that I got from the regional manager was that, they're budgeted. Argo, their contractor is allotted budgeted according to the road classification, economic activity, et cetera, of the area. However, I did not think of going one level above that. So I don't mean to slow down your letter, but would it be okay? We described or we discussed perhaps joining in the school board. That East Dunn Lake Road is also served by school bus route as well. If I could add my area to your letter.
I would ask Director Yusof that if that's the case, that we write a separate letter for Dunn Lake Road. I'm not disputing that road may be equally as bad. I can tell you that these people, it is so bad that contractors are no longer performing services. I know a farrier who no longer will go up to service the Stewart Lake Road because it damages the truck. I've heard that cattle liners are difficult to get for the Stewart Lake Ranch because cattle liners won't go up. I've heard that the kitty litter mine is having difficulties with transportation because of the condition of the road. This is untenable for the businesses and the residents in this area, and it is the only route that they have to travel. So that is the reason why I thought we should escalate this as a TNRD letter.
Thank you. Director Blackwell.
Yeah, just looking at this and excellent point to Director Middleton on whether or not there's a school bus running on this route. So the first thing that comes to mind is there a service level review needed on this road, which may be the question to ask of MOTI and the ministry. If something has changed, i.e. a school has closed and now everybody's being bussed in, that is a service level change. It would theoretically change the level of grading and maintenance on that road. So that may be an avenue to go forward on this, but it also through the chair to staff, I think it would probably be, I know we have a million things to learn, but bringing MOTI in for a learning session at a workshop in the next 6 months, I think would be a fantastic idea, because I'm sure this is a question for pretty much everybody in the room. Thank you.
Director Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to Director Green. Does any of this, forgive my ignorance on this road, does any of this road go through First Nations land at all? And would they be involved?
I don't have a definitive on that. It goes through the Lac du Bois Park area on its way up, and I'm hearing some people say that it might be, but I don't know.
Thank you. I think Director Sao, I think that it would be more seemly to bring your requests separately so that we don't dilute or have one cancel out the other. So any further questions on the motion regarding the letter for Trunk Hill Chris Creek Road? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. The next item is the letter of support for Rogers. No motion is required, but there is a brief verbal update from the CAO.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I will be brief on this one, and then it'll be the last time I'm speaking today. So as I shared with the board via email, and to publicly provide some background, I needed to sign this letter on behalf of the board of directors due to tight timing. So Rogers, like TELUS from last meeting, was looking for support for their grant application. And given that our next board meeting was past the deadline, this was the best solution. We do have a practice and process for situations such as this, where I do sign on behalf of the organization, and the board would formally see the letter at the next agenda, which we're doing today for information. This, of course, would only occur in very limited and time-sensitive situations. Improved and enhanced connectivity with internet and cell coverage is extremely important throughout our entire regional district. And I fully support the infrastructure, and I'm sure the board would as well. So if there's any questions, I'd gladly take them.
Any questions for CEO Hildebrandt regarding the letter of support for Rogers? No. Seeing none, we have a request, item 11.3, letter of support for Bonaparte First Nation regarding the Maccabee fossil beds to the east of Cache Creek.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Director Stamer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to suggest that we write our own letter of support and thank the Bonaparte First Nations for their gracious opportunity to use their letter, but I think we should be using our own letter.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? Any opposed? None, that is carried. Next item, notice of motion. There is no debate or discussion or anything about the notice of motion. Director Grenier will read it out, and this is a notice to say that this will be coming forward to the board for consideration on the agenda of the January meeting. So this is basically a month in advance heads up. So Director Grenier, if you'd like to read it, please.
Discussion at the last council meeting, and this issue was deferred so that I could produce this today. So I'll read this. Whereas since 1998, Tobiano zones have remained largely unchanged in a CD or comprehensive development zone at the end of bylaw 2400. And whereas this is despite the changes in the overall development concept and general accepted land use bylaw language and other regulations. And whereas if a broad Tobiano zoning amendment application is not received to revisit land use regulations, the TNRD Planning Department has stated they anticipate an ever increasing number in amendments, variances to deal with the CD1 bylaw parameters of Tobiano. Therefore, be it resolved that the board directs staff to investigate and bring a report to the board on recent years of land use applications in Tobiano and a review of the CD1 terminology and outline of the challenges with administering that zoning.
Thank you very much. We will be revisiting this early in the new year. Move on to item 13, question period. I don't see anyone in the gallery. Do we have any online questions? No. Seeing none, I declare this meeting adjourned. We will see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.